Welcome to the Flagrant Foul Fantasy Show. We focus on three major sports, the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB. And we try to give you the best content to win your fantasy leagues. Again, welcome and thank you for listening. We are now available on our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Samsung Podcasts, and Podchaser. Along with that, don't forget to follow us on our Facebook page, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Tumblr. And please subscribe, follow, share, like, comment, or whatever you feel like. I hope you enjoy this episode. There are too many wideouts to count. There are the certifiable stars like CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. And then there are the guys on their way up in stardom like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Not to mention the guys that have stayed consistent through their long careers like Mike Evans and Keenan Allen. When looking at this in fantasy terms, there's a lot of places to go right and there's a lot of places to go wrong. And it's up to us to decide who we think will outperform their ADP and to dodge the guys who we think will be fantasy duds this year. In this episode, I will go through each round and pick out one guy I think that is worth taking. Some will be safe fantasy starters and some may be risks that I think will reward you with production at the end of the season. I will go about this as if I was drafting for a 10-team league and we'll be picking one, sometimes two wide receivers for every round based off ADP projections, and I will be using ESPN as my reference for my picks. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for listening. I think the easy pick in round one would be Tyreek, and so that's why we're not going to do that. Unless you're picking in the top 2 or 3, you're just not going to get Hill. If I was picking later in this round, my choices would be Justin Jefferson if he was still there, but that would only happen if running backs went early, and the other choice would most likely be Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Lions. Both these NFC North receivers are game changers on their respective teams and can do the same for you. They are my top choices as wide receiver ones and for different reasons. Jefferson is a big play waiting to happen, and when they aren't happening, he's still getting consistent receptions in the middle of the field to add up fantasy points. For a guy that was going number 1 overall last year, there are a lot of fantasy analysts that have him drop due to the change in quarterback and his injury that happened last season. But that doesn't quite make sense. When he returned from injury, Jefferson still averaged 22.1 fantasy points per game in PPR and 14.6 in standard. And that was with Nick Mullins at the helm. Jefferson showed he can still produce no matter who the quarterback is, and that he's still the focal point of the offense when he's out there, as he had 30 receptions on 44 targets the last month of the season. If he's still available come the middle of the round or later, do not hesitate to draft him. And if he is already taken, then take the Sun God. He's a great backup choice in my opinion. While Amon-Ra isn't the focal point of the offense as they have multiple playmakers on that team, it doesn't change the fact that he is undeniably the wide receiver one on one of the best offenses in the league for the last 2 seasons. And he has great rapport with quarterback Jared Goff. During the 2023 season, he averaged 20.7 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Amon-Ra is the ultimate slot guy, playing the second most snaps in the league at the spot next to CeeDee Lamb. Not to mention, out of 164 targets, he only dropped 2 that were catchable passes, which means you won't have to worry about starting Brown and letting him do his work. Both these guys are on my top choices outside of Hill and Lamb, who should be gone a lot earlier. While you can't go wrong with Garrett Wilson, he should be gone by the middle of the second due to his immense talent and the Rodgers effect we saw last draft season. Devontae Adams is also always a solid choice, but I feel like he's slowly getting less and less in the Raiders' offense. This should leave Chris Olave, Drake London, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Olave to me is the safest choice here, as we've seen what he can do, and he does have a new offensive coordinator that has stated that he wants to make him more of a focal point. It also helps that Michael Thomas is gone, so if you want to have the safe choice, take him and don't think twice. Myself, on the other hand, would normally take Olave, but this year I'm thinking Drake London might be the better option. London has had flashes of greatness, but there's never been the consistency in fantasy, and none of this has really been his fault as he's dealt with subpar quarterback play and a coach that did not know how to utilize his players properly. Now with new OC, Zach Robinson from the Rams, and his new quarterback, Kirk Cousins, he should finally be able to put up the numbers that justify his draft position. Even if he has to deal with losing targets to Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, there should still be more than enough coming his way, as the rest of the wideout room behind him, besides Darnell Mooney, isn't great. In the third round, I don't mind picking the safe option, and to me that's Mike Evans. He has showed up each and every season, never having less than 1,000 yards in his entire career. And last season, he showed great connection with Baker Mayfield and seemed to be on the receiving end of touchdowns every single game. If you need stats to back up their connection, Evans commanded 24.5% of targets for Mayfield, and I could see him doing the same this season. If I were to somehow miss out on Evans, the next guy I would think about is Michael Pittman Jr. Every year, Pittman has produced, and he's never had consistent play at quarterback, as the Colts have had a revolving door of quarterbacks during his tenure. Since becoming a Colt, Pittman has caught passes from Philip Rivers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Sam Ehlinger, Nick Foles, Anthony Richardson, and then Gardner Minshew after Richardson went down last year. That is quite the list for a guy that just came off his rookie contract this last season. During his time, he's worked his way up from wide receiver 3 all the way to wide receiver 1 on the depth chart, doing most of his damage in the slot. And I think he can replicate this again, and for some reason if Richardson gets hurt, I have full faith that he can still produce with backup Joe Flacco. Just look what Flacco did with Amari Cooper late last season. In round 4, I'm not really high on any of the receivers in this area, but if I had to choose one, I'd go with Deebo Samuel due to all the Brandon Ayuk trade talk going on. Deebo has showed he can still produce when healthy, and if Ayuk were to leave, that means his target share would grow. He also is the only one that can produce on the ground out of the guys that are drafted in this area. DK Metcalf and DJ Moore are good too, but I'm not sure about their quarterback play. Geno did not look that great last season, and Caleb Williams, I'm not sure who his preferred target will be, and I would rather wait on an Allen or a Duze later in the draft. Moving on to round 5, there's projected to be quite a few great options, from veterans like Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and Calvin Ridley, to the wide receiver 2s to their superstar counterparts in Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, and T. Higgins. 6 great options, but the one that is most intriguing to me is the Triple Crown winner. Cooper Kupp has had a couple of injury-plagued seasons, but prior to that, he had one of the best wide receiver seasons in recent memory. He is a couple years older now and does have a risk tied to his name, but the reward way outweighs the risk. There is Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams to compete with for targets, but Williams is just as injury-prone as Kupp, and Nacua is currently sidelined with an injury of his own that was initially thought to be very serious. Really is all up in the air for all 3 of them. And for target share, it's evenly split. Kupp is the cheapest of the bunch as well. I'm not expecting Kupp to have a season like 2021, but at his current ADP, he can more than outperform what is expected of him going into this year. In round 6, there's 2 options I would consider: Chris Godwin and Tank Dell. Godwin may not be producing what he used to prior to his ACL tear a few years ago, but he's still a reliable wide receiver 2 or even a flex. This season, he should be able to put up bigger numbers as he's moving back to the slot where he did most of his work in his career. He still will be playing second fiddle to Mike Evans, but that shouldn't take away from the allure that he has. Tank Dell is the other receiver that I like. He's a smaller receiver that many thought wouldn't stand a chance his rookie season, and he showed everyone wrong with his route running skills and his elite speed. His connection with quarterback CJ Stroud is undeniable as well. And as the cheapest of the trio of Diggs, Collins, and Dell, he's the most interesting of the bunch. Just think of last year in games with Collins, Dell was actually the preferred target. And even though Collins finished the season a lot higher in fantasy than Dell, due to his broken fibula, Dell was still able to average 15 points per game in PPR. Not bad for an undersized guy that wasn't supposed to make it in the NFL. And if I had to choose one of these 2 guys, I'd probably go with Dell. And that is strictly because I love the underdog. Who doesn't love an underdog story? He plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he's always just one play waiting to happen. Godwin is great too at his ADP, and if Dell was gone, I would easily pick him up. Moving on to round 7, I like Keenan Allen. This is the latest I've ever seen Allen go since becoming the wide receiver 1 in LA many years ago. That does change now as he's in a crowded wideout room in Chicago after being traded from the Chargers during the offseason. But that shouldn't stop him from getting his share. Allen has made a career out of the slot and has been one of the best route runners in the league since coming into the NFL in 2013. He is 32 now, so that may keep some away from him, but not me, as he just came off the second best fantasy season in his 11-year career, and he finished as a top 15 wide receiver even though he didn't play the last quarter of the year. Rashee Rice is good too, but with all the legal troubles during the offseason, I'm not sure if he'll play the whole year. Go with Allen, and if you need to, take the gamble on Rice. In round 8, I'd take Terry McLaurin. Scary Terry is another one of those guys that hasn't met his potential yet, and just as London and Pittman before, it's mostly due to the quarterback play. We're all hoping that changes this season with second overall pick Jaden Daniels. And if that doesn't materialize, at least you're not wasting an early pick, and the other guys around him in Christian Kirk and Jackson Smith-Njigba don't have the ceiling he does due to the receiver rooms they're already in. Round 9 is another round where I'm not really high on any of the guys. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed are already in a packed Packers wideout room without a clear wide receiver 1. Jordan Addison will be playing second fiddle to Jefferson's large share and is not injured himself, and Xavier Worthy hasn't showed that he's anything other than the guy with the fastest 40-yard dash, as all I've seen is videos after video of him dropping the ball and getting tossed around like a man-child by defenders. So all that leaves is Romeo Oduze. The wideout will be competing with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen on the Bears, but each of them should command a pretty good target share in a revamped offense led by Williams. Oduze is the last to go in fantasy and can produce just as good as the other 2 if given the chance. In round 10, there's a slew of rookies in Ladd McConkey of the Chargers, Keon Coleman of the Bills, and Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jaguars. And I really like all 3 of these rookies for different reasons. McConkey is going to be playing the role Allen is leaving behind in the slot, but on a run-heavy team and with Herbert already injured before the season even begins, he's not my favorite of the three. Coleman is going to be a part of a new wide receiver room in Buffalo that only has Khalil Shakur returning, and he should be able to get a large target share early in his career, and Josh Allen has already said that he has a lot of faith and sees a lot in this kid. But he's still not who I would choose. My favorite in this group is Brian Thomas Jr., who honestly will probably have the hardest time getting shares early. But I like Thomas because he reminds me a lot of DK Metcalf. He's a very large wide receiver with a large frame, but he can move quicker than you would think at his size. And he also has big playability, as shown during his first preseason game with a 41-yard one-handed reception in Chiefs coverage. In round 11, the options are Hollywood Brown, Tyler Lockett, and DeAndre Hopkins. They all are solid receivers that are slowly moving past their primes. And this doesn't mean that they can't produce, though. In this round, I'd be taking Marquise Hollywood Brown for the simple fact that he'll have Patrick Mahomes at his quarterback. I like the other two, but Geno Smith and Will Levis are nowhere near the talent and on the same level as the three-time Super Bowl champion. In round 12, I have to go a little out there as ESPN has no wideouts expected to be taken this round's range. So I'll skip a little ahead and pick two guys in the next group for the 12th and 13th. For my 12th round, I take Adam Thielen. And even though he's not projected to go until a round later, I don't mind reaching on him due to the production he's had in his career in Minnesota and then what he did last year with the Panthers. For the first half of the season last year, he was a top 10 wide receiver. And even though this year they have Deontay Johnson, it shouldn't change the fact that he will still get his targets in what should be a new pass-heavy offense led by head coach Dave Canales. Moving on to round 13, I like Curtis Samuel. Everywhere Samuels has gone, he's put up respectable numbers. In both Carolina and in Washington, he wasn't the number one option, but he still proved to be a key part of their offenses. He's never been one to put up the crazy stat lines, but he has been able to provide consistency, which is important on the road to your fantasy playoffs. Playing majority of his career out of the slot, it is looking like he'll be doing the same again for the Buffalo Bills, where he'll have the most talented quarterback in his career so far, in Josh Allen. In round 14, I like Josh Palmer. Even though I wouldn't be willing to take McConkey as early as he was projected to go, I do not feel the same about Palmer. With both Allen and Williams gone, Palmer is the new wide receiver one for the Chargers. He isn't the best wide receiver one in the league, but he's not the worst, and to be able to get a one this late in the draft is great. He averaged 9 points per game last season when both Williams and Allen were out, but all that was with the backup quarterback, so I can only imagine what he would do with Justin Herbert at the helm. In round 15, the best option to me, and possibly one of the steals of the draft, is Brandon Cooks. He's going a lot later this year than last, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me considering he was the 35th ranked wide receiver to end the season. A lot of this is due in part to the 8 touchdowns he scored throughout the year, and I get there's expected to be some regression, but not enough to place him this low, especially with all the contract disagreements going on with CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jones. I mean, who knows? He could start the season as the wide receiver one in Dallas. In the 16th and final round of the draft, I would be taking a chance on Jahan Dotson. He's a former first-round pick from 2 seasons ago for the Commanders, who's had an underperforming season last year that apparently lost the faith of the people making the ESPN rankings. Not for me, though. I have faith that he can get back on track this season opposite Terry McLaurin, with Jaden Daniels being the most talented quarterback he's had the opportunity to play with in Washington. And there's my 16 rounds for my 10-person league. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. If there's any discussion you have over some of my picks, or you agree or disagree, you can message me in my comments on my YouTube channel, or you can email me. And if not, I'll see you guys next time. If you ever have any fantasy questions or need some advice, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll try to answer your questions in the mailbag section of my episodes. My email is flagrantfantasy, BELLER @gmail.com. flagrantfantasybeller @gmail.com.